This podcast is for anyone who has ever felt stuck, whether it's a major life transition, a dark night of the soul, or just staying small out of fear. If you've ever struggled to move forward, if you're repeating unhealthy patterns in relationships, or you have a black belt in beating yourself up, you were meant for more, and this podcast is for you. We'll get real, we'll get vulnerable, we'll probably cuss a little bit, and we'll get to the root of it all, your self-worth. With every step, you'll find the courage to rise.
In case you haven't noticed, we're living in interesting times. Developments in technology, with AI in particular, have shown us that we can no longer fully believe and trust what we see with our eyes, even what we hear with our ears. If you know anything about the technology of deep fakes, it's both fascinating and a little bit terrifying. But I don't say that to cause alarm or concern. Now, I certainly make jokes about, didn't anybody watch Terminator? But ultimately, what's underneath that joke is the fact that humanity's technology and society has evolved much farther and faster than our human capacity to deal with it in a responsible and rational way. Now, before you turn off this podcast and go, have you gone round the bend? My point is not to rail against any kind of anything. I love technology. I think it has a time and a place, but we also have to be aware that there is a very real human component underneath all of this. And really, truly, the answer to all of our ills in the world is for human consciousness to evolve. And while that may sound like a lofty goal or a lofty task, here is the good news, gentle listener. All you need to worry about is yourself. And the work that I've done over the years, the work that I do with clients, the journey I started within myself, I think 10 years ago now this year, I've realized really is ultimately at the end of the day about the evolution of human consciousness. It was my own evolution, but it was my evolution of going from 10 years ago being completely lost in my own world of traumas and hurt and conditioned existence, in doing the work to really become, not only to become self-aware, but to heal, shift, understand a lot of the things that had become conditioned and automatic within me that were causing me to react in a certain way. And when I say that, it's like that the way that we tend to operate when we haven't become aware of the fact that there are, let's say, things in our past that created certain triggers in our body, right? And when we don't have awareness of that, then of course, because we don't know any better, we're going to continue to live from those triggers. And so really a lot of the work that I do, I've come to realize, is about helping to evolve our human consciousness, and it starts with us, right? It's me doing my work, it's you doing your work. And why I started out this podcast talking about AI in particular is because I have noticed that it is really the call for each one of us to tune into our own inner truth and discernment. It has never been more critical for each one of us to become fluent in the language of our own bodies and in the language of our intuition that has that bullshit meter within you. And I know you know what I'm talking about, because I guarantee that you can point to at least one time in your life when there was a sequence of events or a situation that was happening and you had this little ping. And it might feel different for different people. It was either in your gut or it was just this little nudge, this little knowing that either said, do this, don't do that, or that gave you this little nudge that was like, something's off. And I can guarantee you that every single time you felt that and overrode it, that little voice or that little nudge turned out to be accurate. That was certainly true in my own life. And I still continue to learn what that ping is within me, but I've learned to trust it when it comes up. And I've learned to trust the things that you can't always put into words, because everyone perceives information differently, right? Only 5% of how we operate comes from our conscious mind. 95% of what we do comes from our unconscious mind, which means right now you're not aware of telling your heart to beat or your cells to multiply, divide, do all the things, right? You're not telling your body to do all these functions. All of these things are happening unconsciously, which even if you don't have within the realm of your acceptance that there is anything beyond us, we can all at least at a baseline agree that we are taking in vastly larger amounts of information in our perception than your conscious mind can possibly assimilate, right? So if we hold that to be true, which I think we can all agree on that, no matter where you fall on the spectrum, then it stands to reason that you're picking up on little cues that you may not be able to consciously process. And so anytime you start to have that feeling of like, ooh, something's off, or that doesn't feel right, that right there is what I want to invite you to start to not only listen to, but to start to strengthen in yourself. And you've heard me say before to become the curious observer of your life. But this is where you're starting to learn discernment, which is one of my favorite words, because some people will confuse the word judgment with discernment, and these two are not the same thing. Discernment is literally saying, according to the dictionary, the ability to judge well. And sometimes when we think of that word judgment, we use it in the negative context of passing judgment upon someone. But really what judgment is your ability to say this or that, yes or no, true or false. And so discernment is your ability to judge well. And so in this world where information is readily available and also the veracity of that information is highly questionable, you're being invited into a couple things here. First of all, at a very base level, do your research. Do your research from qualified sources, from sources that really resonate as true with you. Don't just take it from a post that you saw on social media or something somebody told you. Do your own research. Go to many, many sources. Find out if this is actually resonating as truth for you. The second thing is really learning to trust ourselves. Now, this may be true for men as well, but being as how I identify as a woman and have lived 45 something odd years of my life as a woman, what I know to be true is that it predominantly shows up within women that we do not trust our instincts and we do not trust that intuition. And the example that I always think of is if a woman is in an elevator or somewhere at night and she has that intuition, a man or someone gets in the elevator with her and she just has this sense of like, ooh, something's off. Listen to that. And sometimes as women, we've been conditioned not to, well, I don't want to upset anybody. I don't want to offend anybody. And I don't want this podcast to take a weird turn, but there are countless examples of where women haven't listened to that and something really terrible has happened. And I think that as a society, we're learning more to start to trust these things, but there's a balance that we're seeking. And so this point number 2 that I mentioned is to really start to trust yourself. And in order to trust ourselves, to trust our own feelings, it really takes clearing away, the analogy that I'll give, it's like clearing away the mud. And the mud it's those triggers that we have. It's the responses in our body that come from something that is an echo of our past, but is not necessarily our actual real intuition. So by way of example, let's say that it's in a romantic relationship. Let's say that you had a partner or maybe multiple partners that were unfaithful or dishonest with you. And if you have a lot of mud over your over your sensors, I've been watching Star Trek lately. If you have a lot of mud over your sensors, you may find yourself going into every situation with a potential romantic partner, seeing through this filter, looking for something that may or may not be present. But if you have cleared that away within yourself, and you're in a situation with a potential partner and you're in a neutral place and you're picking up on something that feels off, you can trust that intuition and that instinct, as opposed to when we go into it with the mud over that sensor because we haven't worked through something that was maybe hurtful or some kind of betrayal that happened in our past. Then you're going to see absolutely everybody as you're going to be looking for signs that probably aren't even there. And we will find what it is we look for, right? So it's one of the many reasons that it's so important for each one of us to do our own inner inquiry. I kind of like inner inquiry a lot better than inner work. You've heard me say before, I've been playing with how to replace this word work in our inner inquiry because work has this heavy negative connotation. And inner inquiry can be confronting sometimes, but it can also be very, very beautiful. And so in doing that inner inquiry, you start to look within yourself with this honesty and go, where do I maybe have a filter up from some past things that I may or may not even be aware of? And here's the good news. Here's the secret. You don't have to spend years at a time going in and excavating the exact moment that this came from. You really don't. That's a whole other podcast, but you really don't. But I don't want to get off topic, and it's so easy for me to get off topic and squirrel down rabbit holes. But my point in saying that in this context is the importance of doing your inner inquiry is to clear up that sensor so that you can begin to trust yourself when you have some kind of intuitive hit. You have some kind of bodily message. You can start to learn the language of your own body that's talking to you all the time, that's picking up on all this information, that's going, ooh, that thing you just read, something about it feels off to me. Or that thing that person said, it wasn't even their words, but there was just, something just felt off about that. That, I will guarantee you, is a better truth meter than anything else you can possibly find. Your own inner guidance, your own inner wisdom, your own inner bullshit meter is more accurate than you can possibly imagine. And it is never, in my humble opinion, but it's my podcast, so it is my opinion, has never been more important for each of us to do that inner inquiry and to tune into what we really know to be true, because we truly are entering into an age when you cannot trust what you see with your eyes or you hear with your ears. It used to be that a photo or a video were proof positive that something had taken place, and that's no longer the case. And it really is the way that one of the ways that we navigate what are very challenging times and do it in a way where we hold our integrity and we actually can feel balanced and even good, even in the midst of what seems like chaos around us, is when we do that inner inquiry and when we start to tap into our own inner truth, which ultimately is our own inner power, right? Because the other thing that I'm sure you've noticed is if you look out into the media, most of what you will see on the internet or in the news, it's all designed to elicit a feeling within you. Now, that's not a conspiracy theory, that's just a fact. We didn't used to have 24/7 news. I think it was the O.J. Simpson car chase that was one of the events that started nonstop coverage of media events. I'm going to put an asterisk in that because I don't know if that's entirely accurate, but I read that somewhere. See, fact checking. But my point in saying that is that we have never it didn't used to have this nonstop barrage of input. And all of those images and all of those stories are really designed to elicit a reaction in you, and not a positive one. And I think it really started out because people in the news and in the media were like, hey, we get people to watch when we do this, because what you're doing is they're showing you it's a stimulus and a response. Right? It's a story and a reaction. It's an image, and images are very powerful. And you have a reaction to it, that creates a chemical reaction within your body. And if every time you open the news and you read something and you have a stress response, then ultimately you're going to end up addicted. And as messed up as it sounds, you're going to end up unconsciously wanting more of that. And so this is why sometimes we'll find ourselves, and we jokingly call it doom scrolling, but we'll find ourselves doing that. And then sometimes we don't understand why we keep going back to it. We don't even realize that it's creating a negative feeling in us. Well, we might realize it, but we don't realize that we have become addicted to that negative feeling. So the reason that I say that is because it's also incumbent upon you to be ruthless about what you choose to consume, because not only are we in a time when tuning into your own inner truth matters so much more than, in my opinion, it ever has before, it's also that much more critical that you be the one that is in control of what's going into your brain and your body, and that you gatekeep ruthlessly when you find yourself at a point where you're consuming content or news stories or something else that are really starting to create within you a very negative, heavy, and depressive state. Now, I want to put a little caveat in here, because none of what I'm saying is denying that there are horrible, crappy, awful, evil things that happen in the world. None of it is saying that that doesn't exist. What I am saying is that you are no good to us if you are in a depressive puddle on the floor, because events in the external environment have taken you there. And this is the way that we start to shift many of the things that we see going on around us, is again, for each one of us to do that inner inquiry, for each one of us to truly understand, what is my personal power? What is my power of choice? Because there's only going to continue to be more noise in the environment, more chaos, more reasons for doubt and heaviness and concern and despair and all these things. And the way through that, for your mental health, for your emotional health, for all of us as humanity, y'all are sitting here going, man, Jen, you're speaking in esoteric, broad terms. You don't even know the half of it. Hang on to your butts, people. But the way for us to navigate our way through that is for each one of us to deeply understand the personal power that you have within that. And that really starts with not only that inner inquiry, but it starts with you understanding how to heal the relationship of trust in yourself, how to tap into your own intuition, your own language that your body speaks to you when something feels off, and learning to really trust it. And that's really the way that we can, guard against sounds awfully, I don't like the combative undertone to that, but that we can hold our center when so much around us in the media and on the internet and the things that we see and the scams that are going around of people using deep fakes of a granddaughter's voice to call the grandmother and squeeze money out of her, right? It's in that type of world, in that type of environment, your own inner compass that tells you what's true and what's not, and your ability to trust that's your saving grace in this. And so that's part of the invitation at this point, is really for you to become, one of my favorite words, unfuckwithable. Because when you as an individual have a very, very finely tuned inner bullshit truth meter, then no one else gets to control you, because you are standing as the agent and the sovereign being in your life and in your own truth. And that is ultimately what the challenge is, especially at this point in our society, is to do exactly that. And for each of us to be able to discern and understand what is really true, and to take a stand within yourself for what you deeply know to be true. And to trust that intuition, that little nudge, that little voice that you have, even if it's very, very quiet, that you start to trust it and you start to understand the language that your body is speaking to you that says, something about that is off. And that ability to discern and to trust yourself, your own intuition, your own inner guidance, that is worth its weight in gold. And just like gold, this is my invitation to you to sparkle on. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Courage to Rise podcast. Visit my website, couragetorise.com, for more information on one-on-one coaching, group coaching programs, and other upcoming events. Remember, life's too short not to sparkle. Sparkle on.